The lecture hall was filled with murmurs and whispers in dozens of languages, translated instantly by hovering orbs above the audience. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their assigned seats, scaled creatures from Varnis Prime, ethereal beings from the gas worlds of, crystalline minds from, space, all gathered for the highly anticipated presentation from the renowned Dr. The scholar stood alone at the center stage, his chitinous mandibles clicking softly as he adjusted the interface. His 6 thin fingers danced over the console, and the massive hologram in the center of the room flickered to life. A rotating Mada of human anatomy span slowly, translucent layers revealing muscle structure, nervous systems, and brain patterns. The murmurs fell to silence. "I thank the Council for granting me this audience," began his translator broadcasting a clear, melodic voice. "For centuries, we have observed humanity with curiosity and, at times, confusion. Their physiology is unremarkable by galactic standards. Their technology, though advanced, follows predictable paths. Their diplomacy, often inconsistent. Yet, they persist. They win wars they should not. They survive disasters that would annihilate other species. I believe I have found part of the answer." He gestured with one long arm and zoomed in on the human brain structure. Highlighted neural pathways pulsed with simulated signals. "I present to you what I call the human kill switch." A collective murmur returned, accompanied by doubt. The Christine delegate from emitted light pulses of skepticism. "A myth," someone whispered. Raised one of his arms for silence. "Please observe." He activated a sequence. The hologram changed, now showing grainy combat footage from a human colony and an attack. An alien raiding party descended upon civilians, farmers, laborers, families. Chaos ensued. But then the footage slowed. A human woman, cornered and wounded, suddenly shifted. Her body language transformed, her eyes sharpened, her breathing steadied. She grabbed a farming tool and charged, disabling 2 armed attackers with ferocious precision. Her wounds seemed to no longer matter. She fought until she collapsed. Let the footage run out. The room was silent. He continued. "This is not adrenaline alone. We have observed these responses far beyond what any chemical rush could sustain. Neural scans indicate the activation of ancient instinct pathways, deeply embedded commands that override pain, fear, and logic. This is not merely survival instinct. It is something darker. A genetic trigger that, when activated, compels the human to destroy threats at all costs." He gestured again, showing multiple examples from various recorded conflicts. Human soldiers refusing to surrender even after dismemberment. Ship engineers batting boarding parties with tools and bare hands long after safety measures were breached. Civilians turning deadly in moments of hopeless ambush. Each recording showed the same frightening pattern. Fear transformed into calm fury. Logic surrendered to brute efficiency. The envoy hissed. "Your conclusions are dangerous speculation." The warlord, sitting in the shadows of the assembly, simply inclined his heavy head in silence. Continued, his mandibles clicking more rapidly with excitement. "You believe it's speculation? Observe again." He brought up classified footage, an ambush during peace talks. The alien attackers had far superior weapons and numbers. The human diplomats, dressed in civilian clothing, appeared cornered. But within seconds, they reacted, a diplomat disarming an attacker with fluid motion, another using a pen as a lethal projector, a third using a severed arm of an attacker to disable another. None of them survived, but they inflicted massive casualties in seconds. The attackers had left the scene shaken and afraid. Turned to the assembly. "I have spent half my career studying apex predators across the stars. None come close to this. Humans have no claws, no natural weapons, yet they adapt and destroy threats with horrifying creativity. But what makes them unique is this trigger. It activates in desperation, in hopelessness, and once it does, it cannot be turned off until the threat is gone or they are." The room was deathly silent. Shadows stretched along the walls as diplomats exchanged worried glances. A spectral being from, finally broke the silence. Why would evolution create such a dangerous flaw? Hesitated. I do not believe it is a flaw. I believe it is by design. Humans evolved on a world vast beyond our comprehension. Their ancestors needed to be more than survivors. They needed to become predators of predators. This kill switch is the final safeguard. It makes them impossible to corner. It turns prey into killers. The hologram dimmed, leaving only the dim lights of the hall and the weight of realization. Spoke his final words with quiet certainty. We have seen them fight wars that logic says they should lose. We have seen them resist extinction. This is why. Under pressure, they transform. The kill switch is not a myth. It is the reason humanity endures, and the reason we must never assume they are weak. The room remained silent for a long moment, before the whispers resumed, now filled with tension and unease. The sterile lab was filled with quiet humming as machines ran diagnostics, holographic displays flickering with complex data in hundreds of alien languages. Stood at the center, his 6 delicate fingers manipulating fields of light as he pulled up more footage. Around him, a private group of scientific advisors from across the galaxy leaned in. The atmosphere was no longer one of scholarly curiosity. It was electric with tension. He brought up a sequence recorded from a Terran rescue ship and an attack by pirates. The ship's shields had failed. Most species in that situation would surrender or try to negotiate. The humans, however, responded differently. Footage showed the crew, medics, pilots, and supply officers locking down corridors, using maintenance panels to set improvised traps, redirecting ship energy to electromagnetic pulses that disabled pirate targeting systems. One supply clerk, barely trained in combat, rigged an explosive device out of ration containers and volatile fuel cells, timing it with flawless precision. The attackers were annihilated before they understood what had happened. The footage cut off, and the room was silent. Turned to his audience. The evidence is undeniable. The trigger is not an anomaly. It is standard in every human, from soldier to civilian. And in extreme stress, their minds enter a state, logic is in favor of destructive creativity. They become tacticians, improvisers, and assassins, all within moments. No other species displays this level of shift. One of the reptilian scholars hissed skeptically. Perhaps these are just extreme individuals. Outliers. Nodded and then brought up the next sequence. An agricultural colony, attacked by a roving band of mercenaries. Footage from a remote satellite showed farmers using irrigation systems to flood out landing zones, herd animals directed into enemy positions to cause chaos, even large harvest drones reprogrammed to become battering rams. The colonists suffered casualties but drove off the mercenaries with tactics no trained military commandant could have predicted. The room shifted from doubt to visible discomfort. Leaned in closer, his multifaceted eyes glinting. Outliers? No. The pattern is universal. He gestured toward a neural map displayed in the air. This section of the human brain, their limbic system, is not just reactive. It reprograms itself under threat. The kill switch activates secondary structures, ancient ones, whose only purpose is survival through violent response. It can turn a teacher into a combat strategist, an engineer into a saboteur, a child into a predator. The scientist shivered slightly. We cannot predict when it will happen. But we know it will happen if they are cornered. The delegate pulsed in alarmed colors. What of control? Surely they can resist. Hesitated, then pulled up his final piece of evidence. The footage came from a diplomatic incident, classified and deeply disturbing. A human diplomat was cornered in a room after a failed negotiation turned violent. Unarmed, outnumbered by 5 armed security agents. She tried diplomacy for 7 seconds. Then, without hesitation, she attacked. Using a broken glass, her own belt, and the edge of a table, she incapacitated all 5 attackers in under 20 seconds. Bloodied and shaking, she didn't stop until they no longer moved. Only then did her body collapse, the switch fading, leaving behind confusion and terror in her own expression as if she only now realized what she had done. The footage ended with silence so heavy that some in the room audibly exhaled. Faced them. Control is irrelevant. The switch is not a conscious choice. It is biological imperative. It is not triggered by will but by circumstance. The closer they come to perceived annihilation, the faster it takes over. One of the advisors asked softly, "Why does this matter to us?" Straightened. "Because we have spent cycles negotiating with them, trading with them, and dismissing them as unpredictable but manageable. We assumed their wildness was cultural. It is not. It is encoded. In every agreement, every confrontation, every treaty, if they are cornered, they will not surrender. They will not retreat. They will fight until the situation is destroyed, or they are. We must factor this into every interaction with their species." The alien scholars exchanged worried glances. The implications were horrifying. Negotiations could spiral out of control without warning. Conflicts could become bloodbaths in an instant. Colonies deemed safe could erupt into guerrilla warfare if pressured. Looked each one of them in the eye. If you push a human to the edge, you are not speaking to the same person anymore. You are speaking to something ancient. Something designed to end threats without mercy or hesitation. The room fell into silence again, this time with no whispers of disbelief, only fear. The medical facility was quiet, the hum of machines the only sound as observed the unconscious human subject through a thick observation window. The Terran, a young woman rescued from a failed diplomatic mission, lay motionless on the examination table. Monitors displayed her vitals, elevated heart rate, adrenaline levels spiking even in sleep. Adjusted the holographic controls, displaying her neural scans. Patterns flickered and pulsed in chaotic, almost erratic formations. No other species showed such neurological turbulence and sedation. His clawed fingers hesitated over the control panel. He could trigger a simulation to observe the reaction in. But did he dare? Slowly, he tapped the control. Inside the chamber, the temperature subtly dropped, lights dimmed, and mechanical sounds mimicked distress calls, carefully engineered sensory cues simulating extreme threat. At first, the human's body tensed slightly. Heart rate surged. Brainwave patterns ignited. Then, without waking, her hand twitched, searching instinctively. Her fingers closed around nothing, yet her breathing slowed, becoming rhythmic, not panicked, but measured. Her body had slipped into a predatory readiness. Knew this state. They had labeled it the trigger trance. The human's muscles called beneath the skin, her subconscious responding to imaginary danger as though it were real. Her eyelids fluttered, and beneath them, her eyes darted rapidly. Dreams of survival tactics. Her fingers moved in subtle patterns, mimicking weapon grips and feints. Terminated the simulation, and her body relaxed fractionally, though the tension never entirely left. He stepped away from the glass. Behind him, Director, a senior intelligence officer from the Dominion, watched in silence. "You see it now," murmured. Bioluminescent markings dimmed in concern. "I wanted to believe you exaggerated." Shook his head. "We thought this was learned behavior. It's not. Their bodies prepare for violence on a molecular level. Their minds simulate threats during sleep, rehearse scenarios their conscious minds may never face. Even in unconsciousness, they adapt." Was lowered. "How do they not destroy themselves?" Smiled thinly. "They nearly have. Repeatedly. But they learn to leash it, until the leash snaps." He gestured toward the sleeping human. "If she awakens cornered, there will be no reasoning with her. Only strategy and aggression." The door behind them opened with a soft hiss. Commandant of the Irix coalition entered, his crimson exoskeleton glinting in the sterile light. "The council demands recommendations." His tone was tense. Nodded. "You'll find my report insufficient. The only real recommendation is caution. Every scenario where humans are involved must be modded twice, once for rational diplomacy, and once for triggered escalation." stiffened. We cannot afford to treat every human as a potential weapon. Turned, his multifaceted eyes cold. Afford it or not, Commandant, that is what they are. Shifted uneasily. There's more. Exhaled and activated another projection. Footage from a recent Beordan skirmish. A human freighter intercepted by Raidens. Outnumbered, outgunned, and with no hope of survival, the crew, tradens, engineers, and civilians fought back with terrifying efficiency. One engineer used pressurized fuel lines to create a of superheated vapor that disabled the enemy ship's sensors. Another pilot lured 3 Raidens into pursuing him through an asteroid field, using gravitational slimshots to hurl unstable rocks into their flight paths. The Raidens were destroyed. The humans survived with minimal casualties. Ended the recording. No formal military training. No prior combat experience. Instinct, creativity, and sheer brutality. Sat heavily on a bench, the weight of realization settling on him. Why haven't they conquered the galaxy? Answered softly. Because they don't want to. But if they are ever pushed to feel they have no other choice. Silence fell between them. Outside the observation window, the human stirred slightly, still lost in restless dreams of battlefields and survival. Broke the silence. Perhaps it's mercy that they are, by nature, cooperative. Nodded. Yes. But mercy has limits. If they believe survival is threatened, cooperation ends. Rose. We'll send your findings to the High Council. Didn't turn as the door closed behind them. He remained at the window, watching the human sleep. Her brow furrowed, her fingers flexing unconsciously. Somewhere in her dreams, another threat loomed, and her mind adapted to face it. Felt a cold shiver ripple through his psyche. He had spent a lifetime studying countless species, charting behavior, decoding evolutionary drives. But nothing, unsettled him like the adaptability of humanity's kill switch. They were gentle until cornered. Then they became storms. And storms, he knew, could never be reasoned with. The Grand Council chamber was silent as, took the floor, the vast circular hall filled with dignitaries from dozens of worlds. Each delegate sat in an elevated alcove, the luminescence of their respective species casting colored glows across the chamber's polished obsidian walls. Holographic displays hovered above the center platform, flickering with data, visual evidence, and recent beta footage. Voice echoed across the hall, calm but cold. You asked for a conclusive report on human potential for escalation. I present my findings. With a subtle motion of his hand, the holograms shifted. Footage played, a human diplomatic envoy and an attack, unarmed civilians dismantling an elite mercenary assault with impossible efficiency. No weapons. No armor. Just raw instinct and terrifying adaptability. The footage froze on the image of a human operative. Blood on his face, eyes calm but burning with controlled fury. Murmurs filled the chamber. The representative, his sleek exoskeleton glistening, leaned forward. You claim this is inherent behavior, not trained response. Nodded Vance. Inherent. Built into their evolutionary framework. Their neurological structures facilitate rapid aggression conversion. Their instincts don't just trigger fight or flight, they compute scenarios in real time and generate violence as a solution. The IRIX coalition diplomat hissed. Even their civilians. Gestured to the frozen image. Especially their civilians. Soldiers are conditioned. But civilians are unfiltered instinct. A moment of uneasy silence passed before the ambassador, her form shifting between solid and ethereal states, spoke in a whisper that filled every ear. Have they ever turned it inward? Closed his eyes for a moment, then summoned data streams of human history, centuries of conflict, civil wars, revolutions, catastrophic violence between their own. The chamber darkened as the scenes unfolded. Footage of urban riots, combat in ancient arenas, footage from planetary conflicts where entire cities burned. He let the footage speak for itself. When the lights returned, none of the delegates met each other's gaze. The representatives' mandibles clicked nervously. And yet they cooperate. They build alliances. Inclined his head. Until they perceive betrayal or existential threat. Then cooperation collapses, and what remains is predatory calculation. Director entered the chamber, stepping onto the platform beside. There's more, he announced. The room quieted. Raised a new display, intercepted human military communications, heavily encrypted but partially decoded. Phrases appeared, strategic restraint protocols. Final fallback scenarios. Controlled escalation clearance pending. Turned to the council. They have written procedures to leash themselves. Because they know what they are. The chamber erupted in overlapping whispers and outbursts. The warlord, present in full ceremonial regalia, slammed his clawed fist on the balustrade. You expect us to trust a species that builds chains for its own mind and calls it wisdom? Remained unmoved. They are aware of their nature. That awareness is what prevents catastrophe, until they decide survival requires those chains to break. The hologram shifted again, displaying Earth. Red warning markers appeared around the globe, orbiting defense grids flickering ominously. My recommendation, said softly, is absolute caution. Diplomatic engagements must factor potential escalation. Do not mistake their smiles and cooperation for submission. They are predators who choose diplomacy. Do not corner them. The chamber fell silent once more. The reptilian chancellor of the High Council leaned forward, his scales darkening with stress. Are you suggesting containment? Shook his head. Containment would provoke them. Observation. Engagement with respect. And never, ever condescension. From one of the higher alcoves, the envoy of the Shen collective spoke hesitantly. And if they are provoked beyond reasoning, voice dropped, then there will be nothing left but aftermath. The chancellor exhaled, a sound like grinding stones. And so we are left with a choice. Engage or isolate. Met his gaze. Isolation will breed resentment. Engagement will breed trust. But either path carries risk. Spoke again. I have reviewed their history. Empires have risen and fallen. They have known loss beyond reason, rebuilt from ruin, and carried forward. But what is consistent is this. When survival is at stake, they will fight beyond logic, beyond probability, and they will win. Not because they are superior, but because they refuse to accept defeat as reality. The chancellor looked around the chamber, reading the fear etched in every face. He stood slowly. Let it be recorded. Humanity is not to be provoked. Diplomatic relations are to continue with highest caution. All military forces are to adjust engagement protocols. They are not an enemy we can afford. The council chamber dimmed. Holograms faded. Turned and walked from the platform as the whispers resumed. He paused only once, looking back through the vast hall of gathered powers. Their fear was palpable, but so was their fascination. He understood both. Humanity was a species that danced along the edge of destruction and called it progress. He only hoped they would never stumble.